struggling black seamstress repaired a billionaire's suit for free. What happened the next morning shocked everyone. The rain had just begun to fall when the bell above the shop door rang, sharp and tired, like it hadn't been used in a while. In a narrow street most people passed without noticing. A small tailoring shop sat squeezed between a closed electronics store and a peeling barbershop sign. Inside, the smell of fabric, chalk dust, and old iron filled the air. This was where everything began. Amina bent over her sewing machine, her foot working the pedal in a steady rhythm, the needle flashing up and down like it was racing time itself. She had learned to sew before she learned to dream. Her mother's hands had guided hers when she was barely tall enough to reach the table, teaching her how to stitch straight lines on worn-out cloth because there was no money to waste on mistakes. Those hands were gone now, but the lessons remained, stitched deep into Amina's bones. The shop was hers in name only. The rent was always late, the electricity was often cut, and most days she survived on small repairs, torn hems, broken zippers, school uniforms that needed to be let out just a little because children grew faster than their parents' income. Still, she showed up every morning before the sun climbed too high, unlocked the door, and worked until her eyes burned. That afternoon, business had been slow. Too slow. Amina counted the coins in the small tin under the counter and felt the familiar knot tighten in her chest. They would barely cover food for the evening, let alone the overdue rent notice folded and unfolded so many times it was soft at the edges. She exhaled slowly, pushed the worry aside, and focused on the suit jacket laid out before her. Precision was her escape. When the bell rang, she looked up, expecting another customer asking if she could just quickly fix something for almost nothing. Instead, a man stepped inside who seemed completely out of place. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that even to her trained eye looked expensive beyond reason. The fabric caught the light in a way that told a story of money, of power, of places far removed from this narrow street. He hesitated at the doorway, glancing around the small shop as if unsure whether to stay. The rain dripped from his coat, tapping softly onto the cracked tile floor. Amina stood, wiping her hands on a scrap of cloth, her face calm but curious. "Good afternoon," she said. The man nodded. His voice, when he spoke, was controlled, slightly strained. "I was told you're the best tailor around here." Amina almost smiled. People always said that right before asking for a miracle on a tiny budget. "I do my best," she replied. "How can I help you?" She worked with quiet intensity. The shop faded away as her world narrowed to thread and cloth, to balance and form. She adjusted the shoulder, reshaped the collar, shortened the sleeve by millimeters that made all the difference. Her fingers moved with confidence earned through years of necessity, not luxury. The man watched in silence, occasionally catching his reflection in the mirror, seeing the suit transform. When she finished, she handed him the jacket. He removed his coat, revealing the suit fully. Up close, she could see the problem. The jacket pulled awkwardly at the shoulder, the sleeve hanging just a fraction too long, the seam near the collar slightly off. It was subtle, but once noticed, impossible to ignore. Whoever had made it had missed something important. "I have a meeting tomorrow morning," he said. "This suit was custom-made, but something feels wrong. I need it fixed today." Amina ran her fingers lightly along the fabric, feeling the tension in the seams. Her eyes narrowed in focus, not intimidation. "It can be done," she said honestly, "but it will take time." He checked his watch. "How much?" She hesitated. This suit was worth more than everything in her shop combined. The work required precision, patience, and experience. She named a price that reflected that, still modest by any real standard, but high compared to what her usual customers paid. The man's jaw tightened slightly. "I don't have cash on me." Amina had heard that before. Usually, it meant the conversation was over. She began to step back, already preparing to apologize and return to her machine. Then he added, quieter, "I can come back tomorrow and pay you double." Tomorrow was too late. The suit needed to be worn in the morning, and she knew it. She studied his face, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Exhaustion, maybe. Pressure. He didn't look like someone used to asking for favors. She thought of the rent notice, of the empty tin, of all the times people had trusted her with what little they had. She took a breath. "Sit," she said, pointing to the chair near the mirror. "I'll fix it." "I know." His eyes widened slightly. "I told you. You need it. I can help. For free." he asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. Amina shrugged. If you remember me tomorrow, that's enough. For a moment, the rain outside was the only sound. Then the man nodded slowly. Thank you, he said, and for the first time, his voice softened. She worked with quiet intensity. The shop faded away as her world narrowed to thread and cloth, to balance and form. She adjusted the shoulder, reshaped the collar, shortened the sleeve by millimeters that made all the difference. Her fingers moved with confidence earned through years of necessity, not luxury. The man watched in silence, occasionally catching his reflection in the mirror, seeing the suit transform. When she finished, she handed him the jacket. He slipped it on, straightened, and looked at himself. The change was undeniable. The suit no longer wore him. He wore it. It's perfect, he said. Amina smiled, a small, tired smile. It fits you now. He reached into his pocket again, then stopped, remembering. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. I promise. She nodded, though she had learned not to rely on promises. He left, the bell ringing once more, and the shop returned to its quiet hum. That night, Amina closed late. She walked home through wet streets, her shoes soaked, her mind heavy with questions she didn't let herself answer. She cooked a simple meal, ate slowly, and lay down, staring at the ceiling long after sleep should have come. The next morning, she arrived early, as always. The street was unusually quiet. She unlocked the shop, stepped inside, and began setting up for the day. The sun had barely risen when she heard footsteps outside. Multiple footsteps. Then came a knock. Amina froze. No one ever knocked like that. Firm. Professional. She opened the door. Two men in dark suits stood outside, their expressions unreadable. Behind them, a black car idled, polished and expensive, completely out of place on the cracked road. Are you Amina Diallo? One of them asked. Her heart began to race. Yes. We're lawyers, he said, holding up an identification card. We need to speak with you. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Neighbors peeked from doorways. Amina's thoughts raced through every possible mistake she might have made, every rule she might have broken without knowing. She nodded and stepped aside, letting them in. They looked around the small shop, taking in the frayed curtains, the aging machines, the stacks of folded fabric. One of them took out a folder. You repaired a suit here yesterday, the other said. Yes, Amina replied, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. For a man named Jonathan Hale. The name meant nothing to her. She shook her head. I don't know his name. He came for a fitting. The lawyers exchanged a glance. He is the CEO of Hale International, the first man said calmly. One of the largest investment firms in the world. Amina stared at him, the words washing over her without sinking in. CEO, investment firm, world. He asked us to find you, the man continued. Immediately, her mouth went dry. Is something wrong with the suit? The lawyer smiled slightly. No, something is very right. Outside, the car door opened. The man from yesterday stepped out, looking different somehow. Calmer, more certain. He walked into the shop and met Amina's eyes. I told you I'd remember you, he said. And in that moment, Amina had no idea that the life she knew was already unraveling, thread by careful thread. Jonathan Hale stood in the doorway as if the small shop were a courtroom and he had come to deliver a verdict. The rain-soaked street behind him glowed faintly with morning light, and for a moment, the contrast between his polished presence and Amina's worn workspace felt almost unreal. He stepped inside, the lawyers following quietly, and the bell rang again, sharp and final. I hope I didn't scare you, Jonathan said, his voice measured but sincere. That wasn't my intention. Amina swallowed and nodded once. I just didn't expect lawyers. That's fair, he replied. He glanced at the two men, who immediately understood and stepped back toward the door, remaining close enough to hear but far enough to give space. Jonathan turned back to her. May we talk? She gestured toward the chair by the mirror, the same one he had sat in the day before. He took it, smoothing his jacket out of habit, though now it fit him flawlessly. Amina remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her, bracing herself for whatever was coming. I wore that suit to a meeting this morning, Jonathan began. A meeting that determined the future of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. I've worn expensive suits my entire life. None of them ever fit the way that one did after you touched it. Amina blinked, unsure how to respond. You did more than that. You treated me like a human being, not a wallet. And you did it knowing you might get nothing in return. She felt heat rise to her face. I couldn't let you walk out uncomfortable. You needed it. Jonathan studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something invisible. Do you know how many people take advantage of me every day because of who I am? She shook her head slowly. Hundreds, he said. Maybe thousands. Yesterday, for the first time in a long time, someone helped me without asking for anything. The shop was quiet again, the sewing machine still, the air heavy with words unspoken. Amina finally found her voice. You said you would come back. I always keep my word, he replied. He nodded toward one of the lawyers, who stepped forward and placed a thick envelope on the counter. Amina's eyes dropped to it, then lifted again, wary. What is that? Payment, Jonathan said. And then some. I told you. I know what you told me, he interrupted softly. But I didn't say thank you properly yesterday. This is part of that. She hesitated before reaching for the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. When she opened it slightly, just enough to see inside, her breath caught. The amount was more money than she had held in her hands in years. Enough to clear her rent. Enough to breathe again. Tears threatened, but she forced them back. This is too much. For you, it's survival, Jonathan said. For me, it's nothing. Please don't turn it into pride. She closed the envelope carefully and nodded, afraid that if she spoke, her voice would break. There's more, he continued. Her heart tightened again. I want you to come work for my company, Jonathan said. As a personal tailor. Full salary. Benefits. Travel, if you want it. The words landed like thunder. Amina stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. Me? Yes. She laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief. Sir, I run a small shop. I fix school uniforms and broken zippers. And you fixed a suit that helped close a deal worth more than this entire street, he replied. Talent doesn't shrink just because the room is small. Amina looked around her shop. The cracked mirror, the faded measuring tape, the machines that had carried her through years of quiet struggle. This place was more than work. It was memory. It was survival. It was her mother's voice correcting her stitches. I can't just leave, she said. This is my life. Jonathan nodded. I expected you to say that. That's why I'm not asking you to leave it. He motioned again, and this time the second lawyer stepped forward, unfolding documents onto the counter. Clean paper, sharp edges, possibility written in ink. I want to invest in this shop, Jonathan said. Renovate it. New equipment, reliable electricity, fair rent, your name on the door, properly. You stay, you grow, and when I need you, I come to you. Amina felt dizzy. Why? She whispered. Jonathan stood. Because kindness like yours doesn't happen by accident. And because I don't want it to disappear. Outside, more neighbors had gathered, pretending not to stare while staring anyway. Whispers floated through the open door. Lawyers. Black car. Suits. Amina looked at the documents, then at Jonathan. I don't know anything about contracts. That's why they're here, he said calmly. And you don't have to decide today. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself. May I read them? He smiled. Of course. Hours passed differently that day. Customers came and went, eyes wide, voices hushed. The lawyers waited patiently. Jonathan took calls, paced, but never rushed her. For the first time in her life, Amina was given time instead of pressure. By afternoon, she signed. The transformation did not happen overnight, but the change was immediate. Within a week, workers arrived to repaint the shop. New machines replaced the old ones. The mirror was fixed. The sign outside was replaced with a simple one that read, Amina Diallo Tailoring. People noticed. Word spread quickly, not just about the billionaire, but about the quality. About the woman who treated every customer the same, whether they arrived in worn sandals or polished shoes. Business grew, slowly at first, then all at once. Jonathan returned often, sometimes with suits, sometimes without, sometimes just to sit and talk. He never acted like he owned the place, even though he had invested heavily. He listened more than he spoke. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the street gold, he asked, Do you know what people are saying about you? Amina smiled faintly. That I'm lucky? He shook his head. That you remind them the world doesn't have to be cruel to function. She paused her stitching. The world has been cruel to me plenty. And yet, he said, apprentices came. Young girls watched Amina's hands the way she once watched her mother's. She taught them patience, precision, dignity. Months later, Jonathan arrived again, this time without lawyers, without announcements. He carried a box under his arm. "I brought you something," he said. Inside was a suit. "Not for him. For you," he explained. "You should have one made by yourself." Amina ran her fingers over the fabric, softer than anything she had ever touched. She smiled, a real smile this time, unburdened. "Thank you," she said. Jonathan nodded. "Thank you first." And as the bell rang behind him once more, Amina returned to her machine, the sound no longer desperate, but steady, confident, and full of promise. The suit Amina made for herself stayed on the hanger for weeks. Not because she didn't want to wear it, but because she was waiting for the right moment. Every time her hand brushed past the fabric, she felt a strange mix of pride and fear, like touching proof that her life had changed faster than her heart could keep up with. The shop had become a place of movement now. Scissors clicked constantly. Machines hummed from morning until dusk. Apprentices laughed softly while working, careful not to break the rhythm Amina insisted on. She taught them to listen to the fabric, to respect it, to never rush a stitch just because someone else was in a hurry. Yet with growth came attention, not all of it kind. One afternoon, a woman in heels sharp enough to echo across the tile floor stepped into the shop. Her hair was perfect, her smile tight. She introduced herself as a representative from a luxury fashion house in the city. She praised the craftsmanship, the story, the brand potential. Then she offered to buy it. Not invest, not support. Buy. We'd keep your name on it, the woman said smoothly. Of course, but operations would move. Scaling requires sacrifice. Amina listened quietly, then shook her head. This shop stays here. The woman's smile faltered. You're thinking emotionally. Amina met her gaze. I'm thinking responsibly. When the woman left, she took her business card with her, but she left behind something heavier. Doubt. That night, Amina lay awake again, staring at the ceiling like she used to. Only now the worries had changed shape instead of disappearing. Jonathan noticed. You don't have to fight everyone, he said one evening as they locked up together. I'm not fighting, Amina replied. I'm protecting. From what? From becoming something that forgets where it came from. Jonathan nodded. That fear doesn't go away. You just learn to walk with it. The real test came weeks later. A fire broke out 2 streets over late one night. It started small, then grew fast. Old wiring. Dry wood. By morning, several shops were gone. Families stood in the street, staring at ash where their livelihoods used to be. Amina opened her doors early that day. She brought out water, food, chairs. She offered her space to anyone who needed to sit, to cry, to breathe. Without thinking, she pulled out fabric and began taking measurements. What are you doing? One of her apprentices asked. Working, Amina said simply. She repaired what could be repaired. She replaced what couldn't. School uniforms, work clothes, jackets. She refused payment. Word spread faster than smoke. By afternoon, reporters arrived. They asked about the billionaire, about the lawyers, about the money. Amina answered politely, then redirected every question back to the people sitting behind her, waiting patiently, some still smelling of smoke. This is who matters, she said. The footage aired that night. The next morning, donations poured in. Fabric, machines, offers of support, some sincere, some strategic. Jonathan watched it all quietly, never stepping in front of the camera. Are you sure you don't want to speak? A journalist asked him when they finally recognized him. He smiled. This isn't my story. With the new attention came pressure from the city. Inspectors arrived. Permits were questioned. Fees were recalculated. The system noticed her now, and it wanted its share. One official pulled her aside. You're doing well, he said. But compliance can be flexible. Amina understood immediately. She straightened her shoulders. Everything here is clean. The official's smile vanished. Then expect delays. She did. Supplies sat in warehouses. Approvals stalled. Appointments were pushed back indefinitely. For the first time since the transformation began, the shop slowed. Amina gathered her apprentices one evening. This may get hard again, she told them. I won't lie. One of the girls raised her hand. Are we going to lose this? Amina looked around at their faces, young and hopeful. Not if we stand together. Jonathan offered help quietly, behind closed doors. Legal teams. Calls. I need to win this the right way, Amina declined most of it. Not because of who you are. He respected that. Instead, she went public. She documented everything. Every inspection. Every delay. Every unanswered letter. She posted not in anger, but in clarity. Dates, facts, polite requests, receipts. People listened. Community leaders stepped in. Local businesses spoke up. Customers shared their stories. The narrative shifted from a miracle story to a movement. Within weeks, the delays disappeared. The permits arrived. Apologies followed, thin but present. The shop breathed again. One evening, as Amina finally closed early, she took the suit from the hanger. She dressed slowly, carefully, adjusting it in the mirror. It fit perfectly, not just her body, but her life. She stepped outside. Neighbors stopped. Apprentices smiled. Someone clapped softly, then another. Amina laughed, embarrassed and proud all at once. Jonathan watched from across the street, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. That night, she wore the suit to a community meeting where she announced a new program. Free training, paid apprenticeships, priority for those displaced by the fire. This shop isn't just mine, she said. It belongs to all of us. The applause lasted a long time. Months later, a young man walked into the shop wearing a cheap suit that didn't quite fit. His hands shook as he spoke. I have an interview tomorrow, he said. I can't afford. Amina smiled and reached for her chalk. Sit. As she worked, she felt the quiet satisfaction of continuity. Not a miracle repeated, but a principle passed on. Outside, the street buzzed with life. Inside, the needle rose and fell, steady as a heartbeat. And somewhere between the fabric and the future, Amina understood that the real gift she had given that billionaire was never the suit. It was the reminder that dignity, once stitched back into a life, has a way of changing everything. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. The shop no longer felt like a place Amina fought to keep alive. It felt like a place that was breathing on its own. Customers arrived steadily, not because of the story they had heard, but because of the work they had seen and worn. Reputation, she learned, was quieter than headlines and far more durable. One morning, a letter arrived with a seal she didn't recognize. Thick paper, formal language, an invitation to speak at a regional business forum. Not as a curiosity, not as a charity case, as a business owner. Amina read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer. Jonathan noticed later that day. You're not going? He asked. I am, she said. I just needed to finish a hem first. The forum was held in a polished hall with glass walls and soft lighting. Amina stood backstage, adjusting her suit, listening to applause meant for people who spoke in numbers and projections. When her name was called, she walked out calmly, the sound of her shoes echoing across the floor. She didn't talk about Jonathan. She didn't talk about miracles. She talked about systems, about access, about skill wasted because of lack of opportunity, about how small businesses didn't need saving, they needed room. The room went quiet. Afterward, people lined up to speak with her. Some wanted advice. Some wanted partnerships. Some wanted to take pictures. One man waited until the end. Older, gray at the temples. He introduced himself as a manufacturer. I've been in this industry for 30 years, he said. I've never heard someone explain value the way you just did. Amina nodded. Because I learned it from the ground. He smiled. I'd like to supply you directly. No middlemen. The deal changed everything again, this time without noise. Back at the shop, the apprentices noticed the difference in Amina before anyone else did. She was still kind, still precise, but there was a new certainty in the way she spoke, the way she made decisions. You walk different now, one of them said. Amina considered that. I walk lighter. Not everyone celebrated her growth. A competing tailor down the street began spreading rumors that she was backed by foreign money, that her prices would rise, that her success wasn't earned. Customers asked quietly. Amina answered plainly. She kept her prices fair. She kept her doors open. The rumors died the way most lies do when they meet consistency. Jonathan watched all of this with quiet admiration. One evening, he said, You know you don't need me anymore. Amina looked up from her work. I never needed you. I accepted help. He smiled. That's exactly what I meant. Time passed. Seasons changed. The street grew brighter. New shops opened. The area transformed, slowly and carefully, without being erased. Then came the letter that made Amina wanted to collaborate. Not acquire. Collaborate. A limited collection. Ethical production. Local labor. Her standards, written into the contract. She brought the letter home and placed it on her table. She didn't open it again until morning. When she signed, she did so with steady hands. The collection launched quietly. No dramatic runway. Just well-made pieces worn by real people. Teachers, drivers, office workers. The demand surprised everyone except Amina. With the profits, she expanded the training program. More apprentices, better pay, a childcare corner in the back of the shop. One afternoon, a woman walked in holding a garment bag. Her posture was stiff, her eyes guarded. "I hear you fix things," the woman said. Amina smiled. "Clothes, yes." The woman hesitated, then opened the bag. Inside was a suit, expensive but neglected. The stitching along the collar was fraying. "It belonged to my husband," the woman said quietly. "He's gone. I need it altered for my son, for his first job interview." Amina touched the fabric gently. "Sit." As she worked, she listened. About loss, about hope, about fear passed from one generation to the next. When she finished, she didn't quote a price. The woman's eyes filled. "I'll pay later." Amina shook her head. "You'll pass it on." That night, Amina stayed late, cleaning her workspace, oiling the machines, the way her mother used to do. She paused at the old sewing machine in the corner, the one she could never bring herself to replace. Jonathan stepped in quietly. "You still keep it?" "It keeps me," she replied. He nodded. "I'm stepping back," he said. "Not away. Just back." Amina met his eyes. "I know." They stood in silence for a moment, comfortable and unspoken. Years later, when people told the story, they still talked about the billionaire and the lawyers and the suit fixed for free. But in the shop, among the hum of machines and the soft laughter of apprentices, the story was different. It was about a woman who never forgot how it felt to count coins in a tin, about a skill sharpened by necessity, about dignity offered without condition, and about how one quiet decision, made on a rainy afternoon, can stitch a future strong enough to hold an entire community together. The story should have ended there. That would have been the neat place to stop, the kind of ending people like to believe in. But real lives don't stop when the lesson is learned. They keep going, and sometimes they circle back to test whether the lesson was truly understood. It began quietly, the way most trouble does. Amina noticed it first in the numbers. Orders were still coming in, but payments from the collaboration were delayed. Not missed, delayed. Emails were answered politely, vaguely. Shipping schedules shifted without explanation. Nothing dramatic enough to panic over, but enough to make her pause. She called the contact she had been given. Voicemail. She waited a day, then another. Jonathan noticed the crease in her forehead before she said anything. "Something's off," he said. "Yes," Amina replied, "but I don't know what yet." When the explanation finally came, it arrived wrapped in polished language and rehearsed concern. The fashion house was restructuring. Market pressures. Internal reviews. The collaboration would continue, they said, but under revised terms. The revised terms stripped away everything Amina had insisted on. Lower pay for workers. Production moved elsewhere. Her name still attached, but her control gone. She read the document once. Then again. "No," she said aloud, though no one was in the room. The reply came quickly this time. They reminded her who they were. They reminded her how rare opportunities were. They reminded her that walking away would be unfortunate. Amina folded the paper carefully, the way she always did with things that mattered. She didn't call Jonathan immediately. She went to the shop instead. She watched her apprentices work, one guiding another's hands, someone laughing over a crooked stitch, someone else carefully pressing a finished jacket. This was the cost they wanted her to cut. That evening, she gathered everyone. "They're asking us to grow by shrinking," she said plainly. One apprentice frowned. "Does that mean we'll lose this?" Amina shook her head. "It means we choose." They voted without formalities. No speeches. No pressure. The answer was unanimous. The response was swift and cold. The collaboration was terminated. Outstanding payments would be reviewed. Within days, online voices began to shift. Articles praised the collection but questioned the sustainability of the workshop. Anonymous comments suggested mismanagement. Doubt crept back in, louder this time. Jonathan read everything. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say, "Let me fix it." He said, "What do you want to do?" Amina thought for a long time. Then she did something unexpected. She opened the books. Publicly. Every wage. Every expense. Every delay. Every contract term. She explained the decision, not emotionally, but clearly. She showed what ethical production actually looked like, down to the numbers. People shared it, not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. Workers in other industries recognized themselves in it. Small business owners did too. Even some designers spoke up quietly, privately at first, then publicly. The fashion house released a statement distancing itself. It only made things worse for them. Orders slowed for a month. Then they surged, harder than before. Customers didn't just want clothes. They wanted alignment. They wanted to know where their money went. Amina hired an accountant, then another trainer, then a coordinator so she could finally step away from the machine sometimes and think. One afternoon, a young woman arrived from another city. She introduced herself as a journalist. "I want to write about what happens after the viral story fades," she said. Amina smiled. "You're standing in it." The article didn't trend. It endured. A university invited Amina to guest lecture. Then another. She spoke about labor, about dignity, about how profit without people was just extraction with better branding. Students listened. Some took notes. Some just stared, recalibrating what success could look like. Years passed in increments too small to notice until they added up. The shop expanded into the building next door. Not to dominate the street, but to make room. A library corner. Evening classes. Legal aid workshops hosted once a month in the back. Jonathan attended one quietly, sitting in the last row. Afterward, he said, "You've built something I can't buy into." Amina smiled. "Good." One evening, long after closing, Amina found the old envelope in her drawer. The one from the first day. The payment that had saved her rent and changed her path. She held it for a long time. Then she framed it, not as a symbol of wealth, as a reminder. A reminder that the moment everything changed wasn't when the lawyers arrived. It was when she chose to help without knowing the ending. Outside, the street was alive. Children ran past. Lights glowed in windows that used to be dark. Inside, the machines rested, ready for morning. And somewhere in the quiet, stitched into every seam and every choice that followed, was the same simple principle that had guided her from the beginning. Do the work well, treat people fairly, and let the future fit itself around that. Years later, Amina would struggle to explain the feeling that came over her on the morning she unlocked the shop and realized she no longer needed to rush. The urgency that once pressed against her ribs every waking hour had softened. Not disappeared, but matured, like a scar that no longer hurt unless touched. The street outside had changed again. Trees planted by the city now cast shade where there had once been only cracked pavement. The barber shop next door had reopened with new paint and the same old jokes drifting through its open door. The electronics store never returned, but a small cafe took its place, run by one of Amina's former apprentices and her brother. The neighborhood had not been rescued. It had been reinforced. Amina stepped inside the shop and breathed in the familiar scent of fabric and steam. The walls displayed framed photos now. Apprentices graduating. Community events. A single yellowed newspaper clipping from years ago with a headline about a tailor, a billionaire, and an unexpected turn of events. She had almost thrown it away, but one of the girls had framed it instead. "History," she'd said, smiling. That morning, a new apprentice arrived. Young, nervous, hands rough from work that had never quite fit her. She stood at the door like Amina once had, unsure if she belonged. "Come in," Amina said gently. The girl stepped forward. "I heard you teach properly." Amina smiled. "Sit." She didn't start with the machine. She never did. She began with measuring tape, chalk, and listening. About the girl's family. About the job she lost. About the clothes she altered at night just to make ends meet. "You already know how to sew," Amina said finally. The girl blinked. "I do. You just haven't been shown." Jonathan arrived quietly, as he always did now. No cars waiting. No announcements. Just a man carrying a garment bag and a question he hadn't asked out loud yet. They sat at the small table near the back, sipping tea. "I'm stepping down," he said eventually. Amina nodded as if she had been expecting it. "From the company?" "Yes." "What will you do?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "I don't know yet. Learn how to be useful without being in charge." Amina chuckled. "That's harder than running a billion-dollar firm." "So I've heard," he said. He watched the apprentices work for a moment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you charged me that day?" Amina considered it. "I would have paid my rent. Maybe fixed the lights. Maybe closed the shop a year later." Jonathan nodded. "And I would have worn a suit that fit and forgotten who fixed it." Silence settled between them, comfortable and full. Later that week, a letter arrived from the city council. Not an invitation, a proposal. They wanted to designate the street as a local business corridor. Grants, protections, limitations on large corporate buyouts. Amina read it twice. She called a meeting, not just her staff, everyone, shop owners, residents, cafe workers, street vendors. They filled the shop and spilled onto the sidewalk. This only works, Amina said, standing near the door, if it works for all of us. Arguments followed. Questions, concerns, fear of change, fear of stagnation. They talked until night fell. When the decision was made, it was not unanimous, but it was honest. They accepted. The paperwork took months. The results took longer. But slowly, the street gained something rare. Stability without stagnation. Growth without erasure. Tourists came sometimes, asking for the famous shop. Amina greeted them politely, then returned to work. One afternoon, a man arrived with a familiar stiffness in his shoulders. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit, and his eyes carried the weight of expectation. "I have a hearing tomorrow," he said quietly. "I can't afford a new suit." Amina nodded. "Sit." As she worked, he spoke about his case. About a small business threatened by a larger one. About permits delayed. About being told to accept terms or disappear. When she finished, he stood straighter. "How much?" he asked. Amina smiled. "What you can." He left more than he had planned, and less than the work was worth. Amina tucked it into the drawer without counting. That evening, she locked up and paused, hand resting on the doorframe. The bell above the door chimed softly in the breeze. She thought of her mother, of the first stitches, of the rainy afternoon that had set everything else in motion. The world was still unfair, still sharp, still capable of taking more than it gave. But here, in this small space, something had been proven. That skill, when respected, could become power. That kindness, when paired with boundaries, could become structure. And that dignity, once reclaimed, could be passed on without losing its shape. Amina turned off the lights and stepped into the evening, the street alive around her, the future no longer something she feared outgrowing. It fit, and she had stitched it herself. The morning the bell above the door finally broke, Amina laughed instead of flinching. It had rung through so many turning points that its silence felt like permission to pause. She replaced it with a new one that chimed softer, warmer, the sound carrying just far enough to announce arrival without demanding attention. By then, the shop no longer needed announcing. People came because they trusted it. Amina spent more time walking the floor now than sitting at a machine. She corrected posture, not stitches. She asked questions before offering answers. She watched confidence bloom in shoulders that once slumped. When mistakes happened, she treated them like teachers, not enemies. One afternoon, a small ceremony took place without invitations. 3 apprentices graduated. No stage, no speeches, just new measuring tapes handed over, their names etched carefully into the metal. "You're ready," Amina said simply. One of them cried. Another hugged her. The third stood still, absorbing the weight of being believed in. Jonathan attended from the doorway, unnoticed by most. When Amina caught his eye, he nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement between equals. He had learned, as she had, that presence mattered more than position. Later that year, the shop faced its hardest test yet. A global downturn rippled through markets. Orders slowed everywhere. Big brands cut costs. Factories closed. Panic returned to the world like an old habit. Amina gathered her team. "We planned for this," she said calmly. "Reduced hours not the timing, slightly instead of cutting reality. People." They paused expansion. They leaned into repairs and local needs. The cafe next door offered shared supplies. The barber shop shared customers. The street held itself together. Not one apprentice was let go. When the downturn passed, as it always did for some and not others, the shop was still standing. Smaller for a season, stronger for surviving it. Years after the rainy afternoon that started it all, a school contacted Amina. They wanted to include her story in their curriculum. Not as inspiration, as instruction. She agreed, on one condition. "Teach the work," she said, "not the miracle." The lesson they wrote was simple. Skill is power. Kindness is strategy. Dignity is non-negotiable. On the anniversary of the shop's renovation, the street held a quiet celebration. Food, music, laughter. No speeches, no cameras, just people who had stayed. As the evening wound down, Amina sat alone inside the shop, the lights low, the the machine's resting. She opened the drawer where she kept a few meaningful things. Her mother's thimble, the first measuring tape she ever owned, the framed envelope. She touched each one, then closed the drawer. Outside, the street hummed with life. Inside, the air was still. Amina stood, locked the door, and turned off the lights. The bell chimed once, not to announce an ending, but to mark something rarer. A story that didn't need to be retold to be true. A future that didn't depend on luck. A life built stitch by stitch, held together not by chance, but by choice. And if anyone ever asked what really happened after the poor tailor fixed a billionaire's suit for free, the answer was never about the lawyers or the money. It was this: she never gave away her dignity. And because of that, everything else followed.